In 2011, Apple introduced Siri, the digital assistant, using advanced natural language processing to understand and respond to user requests. It could search for things online, schedule appointments, send texts, make calls, and possibly progressively make us more useless.
You already know my name, and you can see that I'm ashamed.
I'm afraid. I'm afraid. Yes.
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast. I'm Anna Bogutska, your podcast host. I'm a critic, programmer, and author of Feeding the Monster, and in this series of the show, I'm journeying through the intersections of horror and technology, from AI assistants gone rogue to terrifying worlds within games. On this season of the podcast, we are deep diving into machines. Every episode, I'm joined by a guest to discuss a film, or in this case, an entire anthology series that's been going on for 13 years, and how it captures our fears and anxieties around technology and the place it holds in our lives. This week, we're swiping right on Black Mirror, the now seminal sci-fi horror anthology series that turned digital dread into prestige TV. Created by Charlie Brooker, Black Mirror has been dissecting our relationship with technology since 2011, from joke politicians to grief-managing AI, and killer robot bees to augmented reality torture and cancel culture. Black Mirror has probably covered every single element of tech culture known or imagined. More than just about killer tech though, the show is a mirror held up not just to our worst impulses, but to the systems that profit from them. Joining me this week is writer, podcaster, and horror scholar BJ Colangelo. We discuss the series themes broadly and zero in on a few outstanding episodes, including all-time greats like San Junipero, Hated in the Nation, the National Anthem, and USS Callister. If you've never watched the show, I hope this conversation inspires you to. And if you've never visited in a while, dip back in. It's even more bleak a watch now. But do consider this your broad spoiler warning. Remember to subscribe and review the podcast if you enjoyed this episode or have been enjoying this series so far, and you can see what other films and TV shows I'll be discussing over on our Letterboxd page. Let me know what episode of Black Mirror holds up the best in your opinion by dropping me a line at hello@thefinalgirls.co.uk. And if you want to support the podcast, you can leave us a review or go over to Patreon and find us at patreon.com/thefinalgirls. And with all that said, please enjoy our take on Black Mirror. I feel like I'm in a very both very Black Mirror and un-Black Mirror situation, because I'm in the middle of moving house. I'm sweating. All I've been doing all day has been moving boxes up and down 4 flights of stairs. So it's this empty, echoey apartment. And I've got, because all my kit is in storage, I've got my microphone duct taped to a stand, so I don't have to hold it. So that's my peak of technology for today. BJ, how are you doing? It's been a while since we've talked.
I think answering this question in our current climate, there's an inherent asterisk to answering this question of like, I'm doing well, all things considered. I'm doing pretty okay, but also there's the horrors of the world.
Exactly. It's always fine, ... or fine, question mark. This current
Absolutely.
minute.
Yeah, who knows how I will be, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, an hour from now.
Literally, it's down to the hour. Maybe in a month's time it's going to be down to the minute. Who knows? But let's talk about something positive and not bleak and depressing and prophetic about how we consume and allow ourselves to be consumed by technology, like Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror.
Oh, perfect. One of my favorite subjects to talk about.
But before we dig into the show, as a little opener to this series, I've been asking everybody, and I have to ask you as well. Do you remember the first piece of technology that you owned or you felt like you owned?
Oh yeah, I have two major ones. The first one was purchased secondhand. I'm pretty sure my mom got this at a yard sale in our neighborhood, but it was the VTech Talking WizKid notebook. It is a children's like laptop basically, and it has little like programmed games inside, like word scrambles, or there was like a history one that was basically just fun facts that you would, get the question on the screen and you try to answer it. But it was from the 90s, so it's still like really, really primitive in its, technological advancements. But I remember having this and feeling so adult, like, oh, I had this little laptop and I could open it up and pretend to type on it. And I felt very protective of it. And when it finally broke, because I think my sister dropped it, I was absolutely devastated that was gone. So that was the first one. But the one that I am the most connected to is my password journal from the Girl Tech company. For those that don't know what this is, it was a little journal that you could write in like a diary, but it had this really cheap technology that you could lock it by your voice and you couldn't open it without voice activation. And to me, that was like the height of secrecy. I was a big like Harriet and the Spy kid. So
oh my God, me too. I want that now.
It was so amazing. And like you could, if you, put a little muscle into it, you could just crack it open. It's a cheap children's toy. But I very distinctly remember being like 9 or 10 years old and feeling like, oh, I'm so much safer than, the little lock that you would put on your diary that could easily be picked open with a bobby pin or something like that. But this is voice activated. So like nobody can see what I'm doing. And looking back on it, it's so ominous, thinking about how much trust I put into this cheap piece of plastic with like a little bit of voice technology.
Oh my God. Honestly, it sounds like it's safer than Facebook.
I would think that it is, absolutely. Because at least I can also hide my password journal as well. So not only can I hide the journal, but then you also have to try to like break into it if you find it. So, there's a little bit of like human security with technology.
Exactly. No one can find our journals hidden underneath our mattress or inside of our pillows. Or behind our desks. I had a little hidey hole behind my desk where I hid my most precious things, including my diary.
Oh, I love that. I had a shoebox under my bed that was filled with my journal and then little trinkets and things that I thought were going to mean something to me at some point. And I remember when my parents retired and they were going to move, I had to go through my childhood bedroom, and I remember opening that box and there were some things in it that was like, oh, I remember this, and I kept them. And then some of it, I'm like, why did I put this in here? What is this?
Listen, I'm well past childhood, and in the process of moving, I've been finding a lot of those boxes of trinkets. I'm like, what is this supposed to be? What memory? This is not unlocking any memory. The whole kind of point of this series that I'm doing, and Black Mirror is really a fantastic example of it, is to really discuss this intersection between technology and horror and this kind of woolly subgenre of techno horror. And pose this question either way. What do you think makes technology so ripe for horror? Or what do you think makes horror so interested in technology?
So I think it's because technology's place in our world has become as universal as an emotion like fear, in that technology is something that people have an eerie fascination with, but at the same time, it's become such a necessary component of our day-to-day lives, the same way that feeling an emotion is a necessary component of being human. And so I think that technology is such a ripe area to explore through horror because technology will always be a reflection of the human beings who create it and interact with it. And that is a deeply existentially horrifying thought. And there's also something very fun in that. Like thinking about even my little password journal that was by a company called Girl Tech. A big part of that company's appeal was that they made technology that was overtly feminine and pink. And so it was reflecting the users who wanted to play with it. And that's like a very kind and simple and low stakes version of tech reflecting the user. But then we get a little bit more advanced and we start thinking about these people who are experiencing like, I think they're calling it like Chat GPT psychosis, where they're believing that they're gods and Chat GPT is telling them that they are. And that is a reflection of the person that is using it. And that's terrifying.
There's a whole second part to this series that we're not there yet, which is entirely on the particular brand of Black Mirror episode that we're living through, which is people succumbing to ChatGPT in different ways, using it as a therapist, connecting with it as emotionally, like a lover or a friend, or thinking that it's their God and giving them directions, thinking that they're the ones that are not real and ChatGPT is the real person. It is, we don't know what we're doing. And the consequences of it have not yet been written. And I'm getting really dour already, but let's get into Black Mirror. That is because I've spent the last few days just mainlining 7 seasons of Black Mirror and trying to remember my feelings watching the show for the first time, because I think I followed it pretty much from when it first started airing in 2011 down, and then every season subsequently that was released on Netflix, I binge watched in the first couple of days of it landing. But how and when did you come to the show? And do you remember your first impressions of it?
I did not come to Black Mirror until it came to the States via Netflix. I had heard about it the way that I think a lot of really cool stuff that comes out in either the UK or Australia. Like if you're tapped into the horror world, you'll know about something, but if you can't get your hands on it easily, then, you know, it sort of just gets pushed onto the back burner. But when Netflix announced that they were going to be getting Black Mirror, I remember being really excited because I had heard great things from all of my friends that were, you know, on the other side of the pond from me. And so when it landed on Netflix, I knew, like, I'm setting aside my day. I'm watching all of this because I really want to just let it overwhelm me. And during this time, I was still in like active cancer treatment at this point. So I was just watching a lot of stuff on streaming because I didn't leave the house all that often. And I remember watching the National Anthem and being so struck by the visceral reaction that it gave me of like, one, I am witnessing something that is very special. Like, I think sometimes you just know, like I had the same experience when I was watching Sinners in the theater where you sit there and you're like, I'm watching something really good that we're going to be talking about forever. And I had the same feeling. Part of the culture. Yeah, exactly. And I had the same feeling watching the Black Mirror for the first time of like, this is special. This is not something that's just going to like be a really cool thing that we look at as a novelty. This has some legs to it. But then also the writing in that episode specifically really struck me at how bold it was and how this is such an unreal circumstance. And yet I believe this happening so deeply. And that scares the hell out of me. And then just watched as much of it as I could. I must have rewatched that first season when it first came out like 4 or 5 times because I just needed to just be consumed by it. And I actively throw myself into existential crises, I think, as like training ground for my own psychosis, I guess, sometimes. And this was definitely an outlet for that of, I don't know how to make sense of my fears about the world, but I can at least process them a little bit through this show.
That's so, Do you know what's interesting? When I was thinking, I rewatched the National Anthem. It's the first episode of the series. The first series is probably the one that I've revisited the least. And I watched it before I moved to the UK. So I watched it with a certain remove that you have when you don't know and haven't even really been or spent enough time in a particular place or a country. And I can tell you, rewatching it now in the last week gave me chills at how much more recognizable the nuances between the political class and the ruling class, and the strange relationship between the government and the royal family. Without getting too much into it, it is so incredibly well written and acerbic. And I remember loving it because it felt edgy. And at that time, 2011, it was probably my most edgelord phase, where it was exactly this sort of like dark, satirical, sci-fi / horrifying, extreme humor that I thought that I really gravitated towards, that I really identified with British humor. But it felt so foreign. It felt so science fiction in every single way, not just the kind of the hook of the story, but every single character in it. The particular coldness, the politicians, even the media element that is present in there. I think a lot of it went over my head initially when I saw it. And when I rewatched it this time around, there's so many other layers and nuances that come from a deep understanding of the world that Charlie Brooker inhabits, that we all inhabit. It's not just his, it's all of ours. And the comment on it was I found it so funny. And the bleakness of it is actually, and I would say the same about many episodes of Black Mirror, the bleakness of it comes in very small moments, particularly with secondary characters. And in the case of the National Anthem, for me, it's when at the very end of the episode, when the Prime Minister's wife poses for the pictures with him, but then refuses his hand and refuses to look at him and just closes the door on his face immediately after. It's a show about consequences, I would say. And sometimes the consequences are revealed in such small details in the episode that it takes a couple watches to even notice them.
I agree completely. And I think one of the benefits, especially these earlier seasons have, is that the general public, before the accessibility of streaming, because Black Mirror getting on Netflix is happening in tandem with streaming really starting to overtake, I think, the way the average person consumes media. And so you have these just prolific, brilliant actors who aren't yet household names in America. And unfortunately, America does sort of set the global standard of like, who is famous, And so I think that was also another part of it, is watching these episodes for me and not super knowing who all of these actors are sometimes. Obviously, many of them have gone on to be like absolute superstars today. But there is something that tricks you into, it tricks you into feeling like this is within the realm of possibility, because that you don't get the distraction of a recognizable face. Like exactly. Roy Kinnear has obviously gone on to do so many amazing things, and he was doing amazing things before Black Mirror, but he is always going to be this guy for me. Like, that's who I think of first now whenever he pops up in a new movie.
Oh, it's, do you know what, one of the fun bits of revisiting the episodes, again, like you mentioned, a lot of the cast were either up-and-comers or jobbing, working actors in the UK scene when they shot these episodes. Some of them have gone on to be an enormous property. Even in season 1, there's Jodie Whittaker, who became Doctor Who, and Toby Kebbell, who has been in so many Planet of the Apes movies, along with a lot of others. Hayley Atwell, who's in the Mission Impossible films. Like, obviously, there's Oscar-winning Daniel Kaluuya. the cast is completely stacked, and rewatching them is always it's always a little surprise to see them pop up.
Oh, definitely. Jodie Whittaker was the big one because when she was announced as Doctor Who, a lot of people stateside were like, I'm not familiar with her. And I'm like, oh my God, she's in Black Mirror and it's Hack the Block. Like, she's amazing.
And, you know, there's a thing about certain movies and about certain shows about calling them prescient. That's a word that I see pop up all the time when researching the series. And a lot of people say that Black Mirror, quote unquote, predicted the future, or predicted the now, really. What do you think about that? Do you think it's just pointing out things that were already happening, or do you think there was things that it was imagining just over 10 years ago that now feel really eerie to revisit?
I think that Black Mirror was and continues to be a show that is using technology as a tool to tell stories about the inherent imperfectness of humanity and human beings, and how emotions complicate everything that we do. And technology is just the vehicle to tell those stories. When you really break down what every episode is about, looking at something like the National Anthem, it's like, sure, you can say that it's about, the threat of live stream and, whatever, but it's not. That's not the actual story that's happening here. It's a story about people's, dedication to the crown and the obligation of service, and people doing things out of, what they believe in their heart of hearts is to be the greater good, even if that means negotiating with terrorists. That is a very human story. That is the plot of, a political crime thriller, if you take out the technology. And I think that that's evident in just about every episode of the show. The entire history of You, from the first series, is one that really rocked me, because I think about, the grain and being able to see and surveil every aspect of, your partner's life and catching them in cheating and whatever. I had this happen, obviously not in the exact same way, because this technology hopefully does not exist. But I was dating somebody in college who I had found out was cheating on me because they had left their Skype conversations up. And so I had this like physical evidence of conversations with another person that proved to me they were cheating. And I printed it out and I gave it to my partner at the time and acted as if like, oh, I need you to help run lines with me. I was a theater major. Can you help run lines with me? And watched as they realized in real time that they were reading the transcript of their conversations with another person. That is not different than being in this episode and being like, show me everything on your grain. Show me what you were doing that night. Don't delete it. I want to see everything that's happening. It's the same human experience of being so heartbroken and so nervous about the security of your relationship that you do something that is a little crazy. Like that's a human story. And so I think it's very easy to say that Black Mirror is, a techno horror, which it is. But again, it's that idea that technology is always going to be a reflection of the people interacting with it. I mean, that's why it's called the Black Mirror. It is the reflection that you have in, the screens. And I think that's the true core of the series.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think, Black Mirror uses technology. Black Mirror is less interested in the technology itself, but rather in our misuses of it. Mm-hmm. It's thinking up this, hyper sci-fi, unimaginable technology very much in the vein of writers like your Ray Bradbury and your Isaac Asimov. But then instead of focusing on what the tech is and what opportunities it allows, it really focuses in and zeroes in on the misuse of it, on our abuses of it, on our overselling of it, on the relying on it emotionally, and particularly, and I think the grain in the entire history of you is very interesting. It's confusing it with something else. It's using it as a substitute. And the episode with Haley Atwell and Donald Gleason, Be Right Back, has the same thing. It really shows us how sometimes we're so used or so tempted to exchange real life and real interactions with a technology that is only there to facilitate it. So most notably in the entire history of you, the sex scene between Jodie Whittaker and Toby Kebbell's characters, where they're both thinking or reliving something else, a previous moment in their relationship and their sexual history, instead of focusing on what they're doing in the moment. It's deadening. It's so revealing about where their relationship is and how neither one of them is present in it. And that, for me, again, it's one of those moments that screams the loudest, but it's not actually the showiest element of the episode. And similarly,
I agree completely.
And similarly, there's, it uses AI in a really, and I would say because there's a lot of conversation live right now and it's no longer a possibility, it's part of our present. But the way that the show imagined the emotional ramifications of AI, I think a lot of the things that we're seeing right now, and that's not because the tech is similar or because it's that different. It's because humans are the same. And it's quite easy if you are empathetic and if you listen and you observe your own reactions to situations and to things, that you imagine how people might react and how they might interact with technology as well, no matter what it might be, whether it's a subscription service that helps you stay alive or whether it's an AI replica of a deceased loved one.
Something I think about a lot is it's very easy to make fun of the people in real life who, have AI girlfriends or an AI companion in some way, shape, or form. It's very easy to make fun of those people, but whenever I hear about those cases, my first thought is how this isn't any different than the number of people I've known in my life, myself included, who have stayed in relationships that were not good for them because one person was fulfilling a need that you didn't think you could get anywhere else, or just the belief that, your self-esteem is so low that you can't imagine that you will ever find anyone better or that you are even deserving of anyone better. People do this with humans all the time. Now we're just doing it with, chat bots, but the practice is still the same, even if the technology is different.
Exactly. Because people are the same. In the same way, it's not social media that makes us competitive. It's that our nature is competitive.
Absolutely. And I think Charlie Brooker is very keyed into the human experience in a way that I don't think he always gets credit for because everybody is distracted by the flashy technology, the near future technology.
I think that's also very reflective of our nature too. We're very easily distracted by shiny things.
Absolutely.
Are there any particular episodes that stand out to you outside of the ones that we've sort of already mentioned that feel particularly revealing of the way that we as a species interact with new tools and new technology that really point to that emotional intelligence in Brooker's writing?
The one that I think gets talked about a lot, and I'm going to talk about it again, is Nosedive with Bryce Dallas Howard and Alice Eve, and the idea that every interaction that you're going to have is going to be rated on a 5-star scale. This one, like, it's harrowing to me because even when the technology doesn't exist, you're not rating 5 stars directly the person that made your coffee for you. To some extent, maybe you are. Maybe you're going to write a review on Yelp. Maybe you're going to, you're going to get the notification on the app of the Starbucks app of like, did you enjoy, using this app? Give us 5 stars. Even if that doesn't exist, I feel like this is how a lot of people are interacting with human beings now. There is a performative aspect to how people are behaving in real life out of the fear that they're going to end up on camera, out of the fear that someone might see them and they weren't prepared for it. I see it all the time. I live in Los Angeles. It's a very image conscious city, and there are few things more terrifying to me than when I am just doing something very simple, like grocery shopping, and I look down an aisle and I can see somebody who is holding their body in a certain way and, pursing their lips and their face and moving around in a certain way to where if somebody were to snap a photo at any moment, this person would look amazing. If this person ended up in the background of someone else's TikTok, they look amazing. There's this idea that so many people are very aware of how surveilled we are and how perceived we all are at every moment of the day, that it has impacted the way people just exist in nature. And Nosedive, to me, is the episode that understands that by just saying the quiet part out loud and adding the ranking system to it. It scares the hell out of me. And then one that I don't think gets talked about enough, it's actually considered, I think, by a lot of people to be one of the weaker installments, but it is Archangel, directed by Jodie Foster. This episode unlocks something very primal in me, and I guess this is me coming from my background of being an educator and teaching children and being very in tune with the way that many parents, I think a lot more than people are willing to recognize, how many parents are becoming so aware of how devastating and terrifying the world is because of their own access to social media, the 24-hour news cycle, what have you, and how they are now trying to completely sugarcoat the world to their children, protect them from anything dangerous, and how well adjusted their children are becoming because they are being so intensely sheltered that they don't have any of the skills to help prepare them in the real world. And Archangel taps into something that I think is so upsetting for so many people because it's dealing with children, that they don't want to let themselves really go there and recognize how spot on he is in criticizing the way that a lot of parents are becoming overprotective of their children.
No, I completely agree with you. And I would also add a more recent episode. And I know there's been some debate about the last couple of seasons of Black Mirror, and I'm sure we'll talk about them in a bit more depth. But I remember being really struck by Eulogy. It's the episode with Paul Giamatti from The Seventh, the most recent series. And very, like the best Black Mirror episodes, it's a very simple premise, and the technology is, in the reality of the show, very everyday. He can see the angles or sort of be inside the photographs. And I think it really hinted at this, it really explicitly explored this idea of the stories that we tell ourselves that are completely from our own perspective, and how more often than not, we really are unable to experience reality from someone else's perspective. So we're really getting a very flattened 2D version of the truth and of real life. And it really, again, through Paul Giamatti's classic curmudgeon kind of style character, being forced to explore what the full picture might have looked like and how that impacted his choices. And again, it kind of hit me like a brick that there's so many within one scene, within one photograph. There might be so many different angles and stories to a single night, a single experience that this show was really trying to remind us of.
As silly as this comparison is going to be, I have such an affinity for lines of just like pure poetry that pop up in movies where you're not expecting it. And Eulogy to me is an entire episode dedicated, or it's not dedicated, but Eulogy is an entire episode centered on a line from the Street Fighter movie, which is for you, the day Bison graced your village was the most important day of your life. But for me, it was Tuesday. Like that idea of like our experiences and even experiences we've shared with other people might not be perceived or remembered in the same way as the people who were also involved is such an eye-opening thing to process, and to see it played out in this episode. I agree with you. I think that it's one of the brilliant examinations.
And in that same vein, Eulogy, some of the other ones that we've already mentioned, Be Right Back with the entire history of you, even San Junipero, I would argue, are all episodes where technology is used as a balm for either suffering or grief or loneliness. And carrying on from our conversation about how Brooker really taps into very human experiences and the difficulty of processing emotions that we all have sometimes. How do you think technology interacts with people's emotions that feel too big to carry in those episodes?
So I don't think this is a surprise to anyone who's even remotely familiar with me as a person or my work, but San Junipero is my absolute favorite of everything in the series. I have a very expensive alternative movie poster art in my bedroom in honor of this episode, because this episode taps into the exact human emotions that I have that are far too big to process sometimes. And I think Black Mirror gets remembered for its bleakness or feeling like a cautionary tale, but it is willing to explore the ways that technology can be a good thing, and that there is something beneficial to having a sanctuary when the world is terrible. And San Junipero is that it's not just a sanctuary for people when the world is terrible, but it is also a place for people to live out who they truly are and who they truly want to be. In this instance, with Yorkie, Mackenzie Davis being wonderful as always, but she's a character who was denied the ability because she's been in a coma for her entire life. But that's very similar to the number of, I mean, this is also a queer story, but the number of like queer and trans people that I know who are only out online, but not in their day-to-day life because it's too dangerous for them. So they're able to build community online and meet people who understand what they're going through and help them through it, even though in real life, in the day-to-day, they have to live stealth, pretend to be straight, whatever they need to do just to survive. And that is a really harsh reality that people don't want to accept exists. And San Junipero basically allows people who may be feeling that way to know that there's not something wrong with them for wanting to live this way. There's not something wrong with them for feeling that sanctuary that is found in the cloud or whatever. I think it's like very beautiful to be able to validate that for a lot of people in a world that tells you like there's something childish or immature if you are electing to retreat to the internet. But our world is not safe for a lot of people, unfortunately. And in some cases, this sort of virtual world is safe. And the question shouldn't be, what's wrong with this person that they can't be themselves in real life. What's wrong with the world that's making it so this person can't be themselves?
Exactly. No, I couldn't agree more with you about San Junipero being one of the most beloved and most remembered and most celebrated episodes of Black Mirror, while at the same time being exactly the opposite of what people think the show is, which is very bleak, very dour, very dark. And this is, I rewatched it only last night, and the last shot of the glittering servers, the sea of servers dancing with one another, and one of them we imagine is our two lead characters, Yorkie and Kelly. But it is nobody in that world, both in the San Junipero reality and in the real world. Not only are they not judgmental, not only is there no conversation about cost, there is conversation about whether the thing that always, let me rephrase, the thing that struck me the most this time around is that nobody questions the reality or the validity of the lives that they lead in San Junipero. Nobody tries to convince them that by existing the life that they are meant to live in this created digital heaven, that is any less valid or any less real. And I think to your point about people who exist exclusively online because that is the only safe space for them to exist as their true selves, this episode validates that so profoundly, because at no point does it say that San Junipero is not a real place, and the people and the feelings and the loves that exist there are any less real than the ones, like in the case of the character of Kelly, who was married for 40 odd years to someone else. That does not mean that her and Yorkie's love is any less real and any less important than the one that she shared with her husband previously.
Exactly. And I mean, even in that episode, the I guess negative side is you see the people who are engaging in intense, BDSM because they've been there for so long, they're just trying to feel something. And again, that's a criticism not of San Junipero, that's a criticism of humans. Like, that happens all the time. There are so many people who, get to a certain point where they just become very self-destructive. That's just a very human response to things. And so San Junipero does feel like a reflection of, our own humanity, but a better version of it. But it's also not going to be idyllic. There will still be problems that arise because it's humans. And that's what makes it feel so real, is that the fault of man is still present even in this so-called heaven on earth.
And what do you think as well about, we've talked about Nosedive and how it really now resonates with the way that we rate, or the way that we rate are able to gamify almost every single social interaction that we have, whether in the real world or digitally. What do you think about the way that social media is portrayed throughout the show? And I'm thinking as well of the ones where the way that characters like Bryce Dallas Howard's character in Nosedive, or the system itself, the world at large, interacts with social platforms, like in the episodes 15 Million Merits or Smithereens with Andrew Scott.
When it comes to the ones that are reflecting our own relationship with social media, I think Charlie Brooker is very interested in hive mind thinking, which again, hive mind thinking existed way before social media did. But social media has sort of poured the kerosene on the fire, so to speak. Because I look at something like 15 Million Merits and the idea that your entire life can be determined by the court of public opinion. That I think is a very real thing that a lot of people experience and worry about. And it used to be that it had to be somebody on a game show, somebody that was a celebrity, somebody who was of note. But because of social media, that's not true. Now it's anybody. Anybody can become, Twitter main character of the day, so to speak. And your future and your life can be determined by that court of public opinion. And I think that, again, the criticism isn't necessarily social media, the criticism is the way that we are using it as a weapon, the way that it can be used in place of, more standard structures of determining whether or not somebody is, a problem. I think that's something to keep in mind. That's also related a bit to like White Bear and, that episode, I think, as well. And then when it comes to something like Smithereens and this like rideshare situation, that episode also deeply upsets me, because I've had a couple of experiences in real life with rideshares that, I've had to leave. I've had to get out of the car in the middle of it. And so I watched this episode, and it's that reminder again of like, technology is a tool, and there are people who can use tools for good and people who can use tools for bad. A hammer can build a house. It can also bludgeon someone to death. And social media is no different. It can help you connect with your world and, help you find the people that you were always meant to find, or it can destroy you.
I think what's curious to me as well about Smithereen, outside of Andrew Scott's performance, which I always think is extraordinary, it's beyond the rideshare. Actually, it's the way that it's that company and how easy the barriers that are put to reach the big guy, the CEO. And again, I really zeroed in on these small moments, like when Topher Grace in that episode, who plays the big CEO, who's at some sort of, meditation yoga retreat while this is happening. And he only connects with Andrew Scott's character quite late in the episode. He goes into what he calls God mode. And I think, and the one request that the Scott's character has is to give the password to a woman that he had a one-night stand with, who was trying to get into the account of her deceased daughter. And it's the separation of the worlds between the guy who's staking out people who might work, who might be powerful enough to kidnap outside of this big tech company, and all the different C-suite executives and the big CEO who's completely removed from the world has created this big, enormous thing that has grown into something amorphous that is very different from the thing that he has created. And then he just isolates it and then he just isolates himself from it. I think that remove of the CEO then reminded me a lot of the Jesse Armstrong recent film Mountainhead as well. The billionaire tech CEOs, builder of empires, of fake empires, is one that we see way too many times in the news today, and that we kind of really glorified for a minute and then became very used to tearing down just as quickly. The separation between those two characters is the thing that really stood out to me from that episode.
Smithereens also, when we talk about, Black Mirror predicted the future, what have you, the way that Charlie Brooker was essentially psychoanalyzing a lot of these figures like your Zuckerbergs, like your Elon Musks, before it became far more aware that that's exactly what's happening, that, these people, they don't live on the same planet as we do anymore. Like, when you have that much money and when you have that much power, like, it's like impossible. You cannot be on the same level as other people anymore. And he nailed that. Like, that episode came out in 2019. So like before the most, recent American election. He nailed it. Like so early.
He nails it too many times. Like, I was also wondering what you thought about the way that, we've spoken about the National Anthem, but how does he play around with politics and politicians?
Oh, yeah. So, and again, I think like what's so funny is because everybody is so worried about, the flashy technology. Oh, we need to be afraid of the technology, that we're not asking the questions of like, we need to be concerned about the people. Like that's what we need to do here. I think
Exactly.
he's more of a sociologist than he is even a sci-fi writer. Obviously, sci-fi is the vehicle, but he's looking at humans. And so the national anthem, we've talked about quite a bit, but I think about stuff like Hated in the Nation, which also
yes
is, we're dealing with like war crimes, and and again, it's a critique of human, and this hashtag stuff is just like, it's so upsetting. Men Against Fire, which is also very politically related because it's also war crimes, of the way that we're seeing this unfortunately play out right now, as genocide is happening in countless places in this world right now. But you watch the way that like the news media and politicians will try to convince the general public at large, or the members of the military, that like, oh, the people that you're fighting, they're not people. You just dehumanize and debase them into thinking that they are monsters or aliens or creatures. And that's literally what our politicians are doing now. They're going on to, news stations, and they're saying these people are, insert dehumanizing phrase here. Like, it's the same thing. Like, that's what we're doing now. The difference is that this is just now a technology that makes you literally see people as like roach monsters. Mm-hmm. It's so unsettling. And again, people are like, oh no, that technology is so scary. And it's like, but
it's not about the roaches.
Yeah, we're doing it without technology right now. Like, I could go turn on one of the 24-hour news cycles right now, and I'm sure I could find a conservative calling immigrants like, disgusting aliens or something horrible. And that, so there's something like that. And then, there's the Waldo moment, and the idea of, people
electing someone for a lol.
Yes. And
Look at that, like, out.
Yeah, and like, it's real. It's so real. There are so many people who have even said like, oh, I voted for Kanye as a joke. And it's like, oh my God, what is happening?
But you reminded me of this episode mostly because of the dehumanization of it, and using tech as a tool to substitute people for technology, to use as your playthings. And it's very poignant and relevant in the more political episodes, particularly the ones that are dealing with essentially the gamification of war crimes, which is a sentence that is so incredibly bleak and dark. But I think this is one of the scariest things watching or rewatching Black Mirror in 2025, is that this is also part of our human nature, but a lot of our everyday use of tech for both emotional and logistical support has gone into the gamification of everything. The gamification of your food intake, the gamification of drinking enough water every day, the gamification of like therapy, the gamification of getting dressed every morning, of meal prepping, of reading books or watching movies. There's a whole element that is both social media, that is paid for apps, that is tied to advertising as well, that is teaching us to not just live and exist and intuitively learn how to survive as creatures, as human beings, but rather to find an app that will remind us how to stay alive and to make a little game out of it.
It's so unsettling. I've been reading a lot. So I've been reading a lot of articles about the gamification of our world, and I found this podcast called Panic World, and they talk a lot about moral panics, usually in relation to the internet. But they did an episode called We Are Living in a Casino, and it was about how every aspect of our world, including our economy, now feels like gambling, and how that is moving parallel to the increase of like sports betting, and how like you can bet on everything now. Like, you can bet on, whether or not that Coldplay couple, like how much money the wife is going to get divorce settlement. Like, you can gamble on anything. And that practice is leading into what we're doing with ourselves, like with the gamification of how much water you're going to drink on. You're placing bets on yourself. Can I do this? Can I, succeed? And all of the weird dopamine hits that we get from doing something like gambling is now being applied to every aspect of our life. And that is horrifying.
But again, it is so much more revealing and horrifying about the part of it that is so horrifying is what it tells us about ourselves, that we're so prone to just literally forgetting how to stay alive unless we can participate in some sort of competitive sport about it.
Yeah. I think people don't see the value in doing things because, it brings you happiness or because it makes you feel good. There needs to be some sort of end game result or achievement. I feel very similarly about, again, like with social media, but like with TikTok. Like TikTok has shown people that like hobbies aren't really a thing you have anymore, because if you post, oh, I'm learning how to crochet, check out my blanket I'm making, you run the risk of having 100 people telling you your technique is terrible, give up, you suck. Or
conversely, if you make something nice for yourself and you just want to sell it to 5 people on Etsy, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you gotta hustle, download my PDF on how to make this side hustle your main hustle.
Right.
Just people need more hobbies and need to keep them to themselves.
Really, that's what it is. Like, we have sort of ruined the idea of hobbies for pleasure, because now everything is like, well, if you're going to do it, like, don't do it unless you're, never do something you're good at for free. And it's like, well, sometimes it's just nice to do it.
Sometimes it's nice to do nice things for yourself and not post about it.
It is. And we've sort of removed that. I think about this a lot with my wife, because she is chronically offline, as I like to say. And we'll talk about something that we're doing or something exciting that we've done. And I'll always get people saying like, well, why didn't you post about it? Why didn't you make a video about it? And I'm like, because I didn't need to. And she doesn't want to. So I'm not going to make her.
It is really strange because the impulse has completely changed. Like, I remember... Oh, in the process of, again, this is just consumed the last few months of my life, but in the process of moving out of this house where I've lived for the past 10 years, I suddenly realized, oh my God, I did not film it. What am I going to do with 10 years worth of memories if I don't have a 30-second video of this flat as it was? Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately have that impulse myself where I'm very bad at taking photos of things because in that fear of being perceived, I never want to be confused as like an influencer in the wild sort of thing. Like, I don't want anyone to see me take a selfie in public. I don't want anyone to see me taking a photo of something in public. And so because of that, I do often just forget to record something or take a picture of something. And I have mixed feelings about it, because on one hand, I'm like, great, like no one needed to see this. This is a memory that's just for me. Who cares? But then, I unfortunately am learning the hard way. One of my dear friends from childhood and all throughout high school passed away very early, very tragically. And a majority of the photos that I have with her, I know are locked away behind a photo bucket account I made when I was like 16 that I will never have the password for. And so then I have that moment of everything is so it's so sensitive now. There was one thing when we had physical photos that you could hold on to and they might get lost, but like you could always find them again. Now, so much of the way that we experience life or the way that we remember life is at the risk of being locked behind a paywall or, deleted because the website went down and they don't want to pay for the servers anymore, or your computer fries and you lose your entire hard drive. Like, everything is so much more fragile that I get a lot more nervous about my impulse to not document things, and which is I'm perpetuating my own cycle here.
And I wonder as well, kind of, and this has got nothing to do with the really sad memory about your friend passing, and then the additional horror of not being able to access your memories of them because of photo bucket and passwords. But girl tech would never. But
girl tech would never.
Maybe it's because I only watched it this morning and I was quite paralyzed by how dark and how possessive and truly sadistic the character is in USS Callister. I wonder what you felt about those episodes, partly because it kind of ties in with a lot of the things we've been discussing about the recreation of life instead of living it, about these these sadistic borderline murderers, but very smart creatures who will act one way in real life, but then live their real lives, this time in the negative, online. It's the rare episode of Black Mirror that received a sequel in the latest season. Now, what your thoughts are about those two episodes, and particularly the way that it paints the character of Robert Daly, who's played by Jesse Plemons in both episodes?
So the first thing I will say is that the USS Callister episodes undeniably have the best casts of any episode in Black Mirror. Just top to bottom, everyone is firing on all cylinders. But the USS Callister episodes scare the shit out of me. And it's because I think if you've worked in film or any sort of geek-related industry at all, and you are from a marginalized identity, you've met a million of these guys. These Robert Dalys and how they function and how they present one way, but then behind closed doors are into some really insidious stuff. But the USS Callister in particular scares me because I view this as the end game for what a lot of I don't want to. No, I'll just say them. This is the world that I think a lot of Snyder Bros wish that they could inhabit. I think that they have this idea of the way that I want things to function is the way that things are meant to function. And we see people starting campaigns online to bully movie industries and studios to make the stories the way that they see them. And that is really scary to me. It is obviously on another level in USS Callister because these are people he knows in real life that he has cast to play these roles, which is terrifying and so gross. It's just gross more than anything. But I don't see this as too large of a jump from people, adding Warner Brothers all day being like, you need to do Superman this way, and if you don't, I'll kill you. It's not so dissimilar to me.
No, that's a very bold but very apt comparison. What's interesting to me about that one is that it could have been about fan culture and about fan ownership over a particular piece of culture, but here it's combining this interesting dynamic of it's the toxic fanboy, and at the same time it's the particularly in the sequel in USS Callister Into Infinity, where the Jimmy Simpson character becomes a bit more center stage and a bit more of a satire of a kind of macho tech bro CEO who isn't actually even that technologically brilliant. It's the idea that Daly always feels like he is the unrecognized genius, and there's nothing more dangerous than someone really brilliant who thinks their genius is unrecognized. This is very much the the central conflict that I can't believe I'm comparing an episode of Black Mirror to Amadeus. It's a central conflict between Mozart and Salieri, and Daly's very much a Salieri type figure who will lurk and watch and observe and get to know everyone that they want to maneuver or abuse in some way. They will know them as much as they possibly can, but they will always know the rules by which they have to play so that they actually never get into trouble. Not in the real world anyway. It's like a Dark Sister episode to San Junipero where the creator of this world does not consider the sentient creatures that live in it to actually be deserving of compassion, does not consider them to have an actual life, so they cannot be killed and they cannot experience pain. Or rather, he coded them to experience only pain but never pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just alarming, and I agree with you completely on the danger of the unrecognized genius, or at least perceived as such, because I think there are so many people, whether they are actually at that level or not, that have cast themselves in that role in their own lives. And that, I know I've said like harrowing like 100 times in this conversation, but it's harrowing. Like, it's so harrowing because, again, I've met so many men that are like this, that are so just like they know how to play the game, and that's what makes them more dangerous. That they're not, loose cannons. They're meticulous, and their meticulous behavior is so deeply unsettling. This is obviously like a much lower stakes, but I compare that sort of behavior a lot to if you live in like the Midwest or flyover states. If people don't like you, and if they are bigoted or if they are hateful, they let you know immediately. They will yell at you from across the street. They will say something terrible, and you know immediately, and you know to avoid those people. They make themselves known. Out here in a place like Los Angeles, where everybody knows better, where everybody knows that like you shouldn't say hateful things out loud, or, it's not in good favor to act that way, they don't act that way. So it forces all of us in this very elaborate game of like 5D chess of trying to figure out people's true intentions, because everybody has gotten so good at hiding them. And I think about that a lot with these episodes and these characters. And again, it's that idea of perception, of when you are aware of how you're being perceived and the ramifications of that perception in the eyes of the court of public opinion, it changes the way that you act as a human. And when you do it long enough, it changes who you are as a human.
Are there any other episodes of Black Mirror that you'd like to see a continuation to? What happens next?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think ones that I would love to see a continuation of is I would love to see an exploration of Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2. Which is another episode that I know people are like not as hot on, but I think there's something really interesting in there. But specifically, one of the things I've been thinking about nonstop lately is a figure like JoJo Siwa, because I think the casting of Miley Cyrus and the kind of the brilliant meta casting of, a celebrity's kind of consciousness being, manipulated for, merchandising gain is one thing. But I think somebody like a JoJo Siwa, or something we'll see in years later from even like, kids of influencer families, I think the commodification of those people and their identities is getting stranger and more Truman Show-esque. And to see how that would relate to having this sort of doll technology would be even more like, the more that we commodify and consume celebrities who are not celebrities because, they're a singer or a musician, but because they are human beings that happened to be famous because they are, influencers or lifestyle bloggers or what have you. That I think would be a really interesting way to explore that. And that's an area that I think Black Mirror hasn't fully gone into yet, is the idea of how many people are famous online for being who they are, or at least a version of who they are online, versus celebrity. Like that I would love to see a return to. I also really, really enjoy Hang the DJ quite a bit. Another one that I think is another like lovey one in the same realm as like a San Junipero and, Finding the Love. But I think because online dating and dating apps have changed so dramatically, I would love to see something related to that, of like the people that are inside the dating app. Like, what happens to the person who is consistently swipe left on? Like, they've never been swiped right on. Like, what happens with those people?
What happens if it's wrong? What happens if the amount of time that they're matched for is utter hell and they cannot leave it?
Yeah, what happens if like they lied on their dating profile?
Like many people do on their dating profile.
Exactly. So like, I know that would be kind of going into the dark side of an episode that people like, but you know, that's something that I really want to explore. And then because I'm a horrible person who loves the bleakness of James Watkins, Shut Up and Dance, I think about way more than I probably should. And this idea of, especially when it comes to like young people and teenagers, obviously what Kenny does in this is like so abhorrent, but we are sort of seeing this practice of people who did something awful or foolish or disturbing or what have you when they're teenagers, and it being the determining part of the rest of their life, because we don't ever really go into like why Kenny is like this. Like, what's going on with him? What made him feel compelled to do? Is this a chronic thing? Is this a danger forever? Or is this like a weird, messed up curiosity as a result of somebody who's been on the internet for too long? Like, we don't know these things about this character. But I would love to see this idea explored of, you know, the doing something terrible when you're young and knowing that it could get out and what that does to a person. I think like the reveal of what Kenny does is like so shocking. I don't think it needs to be quite at that level, because I'm not interested at all in like empathizing with like child predators. But the idea of a teenager doing something horrible, and what is that going to do if the world finds out about this horrible thing you've done? I think those stories are just ripe with exploration in ways that were not done yet.
No, and particularly, you know, there's the really blunt saying of, you know, the internet never forgets. Whatever lives on the internet lives there forever. Is there ever a place for atonement on the internet? Especially if you do something bad or regrettable online. And I would really like to see a continuation of the Be Right Back episode.
Oh, yeah.
It leaves off with the child of Ash, the Donald Gleason character, kind of visiting him up in the attics on the weekends. And I was wondering about that character and thinking, what would it be like if she grows up with this AI dad that is a composite of all of her dad's social media personality? First of all, does that dad get updated? Does he form new memories? Does he form a relationship with her? And what about her? What about when her mom passes and she's left with this AI father figure who has been there her entire life as almost this hidden away, almost imaginary friend? Because I don't think she can talk about him to her school friends or in public. Right. So he becomes like this secret father figure. And then I would really love to see what it's like for her in a few years' time once she's grown up, and possibly once her mother is no longer there. What is that relationship like? Does the ownership of that father pass on to the daughter? Is that even a relationship that can exist, that she owns him? He never ages while she grows up? There's a lot of things there.
Definitely. And I think that also taps into something else that I'm really fascinated by just in general, is parents who make technology decisions for their children before they're old enough to fully understand it. I'm very interested in influencer culture because I'm definitely not an influencer, but I have been writing about film since I was 18 years old. So my thoughts, my opinions, my varying degrees of legitimacy in my writing have been available for public consumption for almost as long as I've been alive. And that is something that I have to unpack in a lot of therapy. And I'm nowhere near the level of some of these kids who their first, missing tooth, their first dance recital, like all of these firsts of their lives have been watched by millions upon millions of people. And Be Right Back, I think that's one of those situations of like, mom made this decision because it's good for her, but like, is the daughter going to be okay with this when she gets older? Is she going to be like, this is weird? And is it going to cause a lot of strife between them as mother and daughter? We don't know. Because also, you're denying your kid the chance to grieve and to mourn in this way. And what is that going to do for somebody's development?
Yeah. And then it kind of harkens back as well to the big open question of the entire show, I would say, is sometimes things are shit and sometimes you're going to feel bad, but you have to feel those things and power through them in order to get to the other side. Because even in Be Right Back and a lot of other episodes that deal more explicitly with technology that's been developed to cover up or patch over difficult emotions, at the end of the day, it doesn't make anything any better. It just delays the inevitable. And the ending of Be Right Back really stuck with me because that delay never ends. You only see this brief glimpse of the life after Haley Apple's character kind of gives birth and has a child. But she's not even able to look at Ash anymore. And you can almost feel that her grief has calcified into something very different, but that is not acceptance. That is not moving on. That is a place of status that she has put herself in and cannot get through.
Yeah. And I think you're so right in talking about the delaying of the inevitability. I'm very concerned with how algorithms in particular have made it so that people are constantly in a bubble of the things that they like or the opinions that they like or like-minded people. And while I think that that's a great thing, like, yeah, I don't need to be spending my day on Twitter with a bunch of Nazis. Like, I don't need that. But at the same time, when you forget that there is a world outside of your direct feed and your direct feedback loop, you forget the tools required, like the social skills and the emotional regulation skills required to make it through a world that doesn't look like your feedback loop.
Exactly.
And I fear that we're not flexing those muscles nearly as much as we could be. And again, that's the thing that horrifies me.
There's been a noticeable shift, I would say, in the last couple of seasons of Black Mirror that have really gone way more into the explicit horror territory, sometimes even fully supernatural, which is something that the show has really never done in previous years. What do you make of it as going into this new, more overtly horror territory?
I think it's a combination of Charlie Brooker just wanting to do something a little bit different, but also Black Mirror does owe a lot to the Twilight Zone, which he's been very open about. And the Twilight Zone also has done that. Like, you will have these stories that seem kind of like they're set in an alternate reality, but then there are ones that it's like, this is ghosts, like this is monsters and dead people. And I do think that this is, again, him hammering home the thesis that these are stories about humans, not necessarily technology. Mm-hmm. Technology is the vehicle. So when we are incorporating supernatural elements or things that are more explicitly horror-based, it's a reminder that the same fears and horrors that we are seeing or experiencing as humans through tech, you know, it's also happening supernaturally. Like, these are both tools to tell the same stories.
And one of my favorite examples of those kind of more horror-tinged episodes was actually Beyond the Sea. And Loch Henry, which I rewatched in a dark room last night and was pretty much indistinguishable from a Netflix true crime documentary. And I wonder, what do you think about that particular episode and the way that since the acquisition by Netflix, the figure of the streaming service Streamberry within the show, and the way that episode Loch Henry really plays with the format, the very specific format that we've become so accustomed to of the true crime documentary, and how it interacts with the idea of creating something that is perhaps damaging both yourself and the culture at large.
I think that Netflix is such an interesting company to me because there are some decisions they make where I'm like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? You are contributing to, the downfall of humanity. But also they seem self-aware enough to know that if people are going to comment on this, so it might as well be them. And in that regard, I do have like a little respect for their willingness to go there, because there are plenty of streamers that would never do that. But they do kind of play a little bit of both sides. Like, it's so strange to me that Netflix will have a very moving documentary like Will and Harper about why it's important to like be there for your trans friends, and then also platform an open transphobe like Dave Chappelle. It's very backwards bananas thinking as far as I'm concerned. But when it comes to the Streamberry acknowledgement, and especially with Loch Henry and how it really does, like, if you just put that on for somebody and didn't acknowledge it was an episode of Black Mirror, it plays out the way that all of true crime series do. And I think it's smart to be self-aware and also to be the one that critiques you so that no one else really can, especially if you do it so well. Why would anyone want to critique Netflix's practices that way when they did it themselves and did it really well? But I think it depends on your read, I guess is how I want to say this. Like, if you want to assume good faith, they are acknowledging it because they know that they need to, but they've also acknowledged that they're kind of caught up in the same machine that we all are, as well as viewers, which is why they continue to make this sort of stuff, because people watch it. I feel very similarly as somebody who writes about movies and television. I would love to never have to write about the new Harry Potter show, but the data points don't lie. And if I don't write about the Harry Potter show at work, like, it will have an effect on our website's ability to stay alive. And it is awful that we are stuck in that loop. And to some extent, I think Netflix is aware that they started a loop and now they're stuck in it. But then there's also the very cynical read of it of like, oh, well, they're just trying to play both sides, which I think is also a fair assessment to make because they're a $1 billion company and we should always be critical of any $1 billion company. But Loch Henry in particular, I thought was such a great episode because there has been this dehumanization that has happened with people's obsession with true crime, and people forget, like, we're not talking about characters in a documentary. We're not talking about characters. We're talking about people. And to have an episode so in your face remind you that these are real people and real stakes and real situations and real danger, I thought was very haunting and very smart. And I unfortunately think the people who probably needed that lesson the most are not the people who actually understood the criticism that was being made. And instead it was like, oh, cool, they made their own fake Netflix true crime doc.
No, I think, to your earlier point, two things can be true at once. And that is a very difficult thing to grasp for a lot of people. But even the show itself pokes fun at needing to be guided by data despite the fact that what you're putting out perhaps is not what you even want to be doing. Like in the episode Jonah's Awful, where the Streamberry executive just says, we tried doing happy, uplifting stuff and nobody would watch it. People want to see dark, bleak shit. People want to make fun of people and be nasty. That's what the audience wants, and that's what we need to give them. And then we can commission more Will and Harpers. I'm not sure where I stand on that way of existing, but then again, I don't run $1 billion company, so who am I to speak? But
right.
Yeah, I don't think you can apply the one for them, one for me on all accounts. But
I agree completely.
But then again, I do want your site to continue existing, so unfortunately, the data does need to guide some things.
Yeah, I mean, and we all find our ways to make through it. I mean, I'll use my example, like, yes, we do have to cover Harry Potter, but that also means that every single article starts with a link to make sure everyone knows who the creator of Harry Potter is and the things she believes in. So you can choose to continue watching if you would like.
But I think with Loch Henry in particular, there's been a lot of true crime commentary that, we've discussed this as well in this show in the previous season too, about our changing positions and feelings and interpretations of it now that it's become essentially a cliche of itself. And that episode, I think, kind of quite smartly both poked fun at what is now a very, very low-hanging fruit to satirize and to make fun of, but at the same time focused on delivering what's essentially a very effectively chilling horror story. Particularly by just focusing on how quickly and how easily it can be monetized and rewarded and transformed into a narrative to suit different people's purposes. And it's very all fun and games when it's his childhood friend with the pub and getting tourists back into Loch Henry. It's less fun and games when his girlfriend is dead and he's stuck by himself in a hotel room with a BAFTA. And everybody is just talking about him and how amazing the work is, but his parents are serial killers and his partner is dead. That is not a win.
Yes. And so years ago, my wife used to host bar trivia, and every October we do like spooky trivia, and there were so many requests from people to do like a true crime trivia, which I think itself is just like ghastly, but it was one of those like, oh, that's what people wanted. And they packed up the bar. It was like tons of people who wore their like favorite, murder podcast shirts and whatever. And it was so interesting to watch people answer these questions and like, they were having a lot of fun until there was a round that my wife had written that was called like, in your backyard. And they were all asking questions about true crime events that happened in our area. We were living in Ohio at the time. Ohio famously responsible for many serial killers. And the tone in the room changed. It was all fun and games when people were looking at photos of famous killers' last meals and trying to guess whose meal belonged to which killer. That was so much fun. But the second it was acknowledging this happens in our community, this happens in our backyard, it stopped being fun for them. And it is one of the most surreal things I've ever witnessed is watching just like the disconnect that people had between something that was like fun and entertaining and like, oh, I heard about this on this show versus, oh, that happened in like the same neighborhood where my grandma grew up with, or like, I know people who are related to this person. And it's like, it's so difficult. It's like, how do you not make that connection that the thing that you were just laughing about earlier is also someone else's backyard experience? And, yeah, it was wild. It was a wild experience, and Loch Henry,
because they're not real people.
That. Mm-hmm.
They're not real people. Yeah. They don't count unless there is that direct, almost like childlike connection to you. And Loch Henry is not a good example of this, but we talked previously about, you mentioned the stunt casting of Miley Cyrus as being particularly astute. And I was wondering, what do you think about, particularly since some of the later episodes where Black Mirror is already such an established property and existing on Netflix with a global reach as opposed to Channel 4. What do you think about the casting, particularly with more famous names like Salma Hayek and Jonas Awful, or I would even argue Josh Hartnett and Beyond the Sea? Do you think there's something smart in using celebrities to tell stories, especially when they're stories about performance or identity?
Oh, yeah. I think it's definitely a case-by-case basis. I think some of them are far more effective than others. Paul Giamatti in Eulogy, I think it has to be Paul Giamatti. I think it has to be him.
No one else could do that.
Yeah, no one else can.
It's patented.
It's so fantastic. But then I think about like Common People from season 7 that has Rashida Jones and Tracee Ellis Ross. I would have preferred that episode to have people that I'm not as familiar with, because of what it's exploring in terms of this very relatable couple, this very like real life couple. I think there was a little bit of a disconnect for me the first time I watched it because everybody was so recognizable, that I would have liked to see people that I wasn't as familiar with. But also, we are, as consumers of entertainment, we are all becoming a bit more global because of streaming, because people are watching things from other countries with a much higher frequency, that I think that it's a little bit harder to do that. Because like Chris O'Dowd's also in that episode, which I think most people know who he is. I don't think he's quite as well known as somebody like Rashida Jones, but he's at least, people can go like, oh, that was the guy that was in, Bridesmaids or on the IT Crowd or something. But I do think that sometimes distracting isn't the right word. I guess harder to immerse in is one of them. But I think it depends case by case. Because with Beyond the Sea, Josh Hartnett was less of like the distracting piece for me, but Aaron Paul absolutely was.
Well, Josh Hartnett stood out for me because I think he had sort of not really done stuff for such a long time. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden he was in Trap and this Black Mirror episode and was playing much darker roles than he used to. Mm-hmm. So it was very much, as a former Hartnetista, I was very excited for the Josh Hartnett renaissance.
Oh, yeah. We are so lucky to be experiencing it right now. He's really been doing some great work. I think that maybe might have been why I wasn't as just like, whoa, Josh Hartnett is here, was because I was so excited. And it was like, oh, he's going to do something weird here, because that's what everyone does. They disappear for a while and they come back and they do weird stuff. And that's what a treat for all of us.
Exactly. And good for them. They get to do interesting stuff as well. Mm-hmm. And I know we've spoken about Paul Giamatti and Rory Kinnear, but any other standout performances for you?
So I have, and this is absolutely like my own personal kind of thing. One of my kryptonites when it comes to any sort of horror story is when a character cries out for their mom, when they are just like kind of rendered so terrified and helpless that they regress back to a younger age. And so Wyatt Russell in Playtest really gets under my skin in a way that is like, it's so unnerving watching him just kind of like tremble in that chair and call for his mom. It like something primal kind of like gets affected by me. That performance I think is fantastic. I also am so obsessed with the performances in Striking Vipers. Another one that I think kind of gets slept on a bit. I think there's, and those are, two bigger celebrities with Anthony Mackie and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. And these are also like actors who are known for playing, kind of these more macho kind of roles. Anthony Mackie is Captain America right now, for crying out loud. But watching the complexities of these two men navigating their relationship. There's so much like subtle work going on that it's like, oh God, they're great. They're so fantastic. But I mean, yeah, Andrew Scott, absolutely amazing. Rosemary DeWitt, I think, is great. Everybody, USS Callister is great. Like, really, like, I don't think there's ever been like a bad performance in these. Like, if I've ever been, not as hot. Yeah, if I've ever been not as hot on an episode, it's been like the story didn't work for me as well. But it's never the performances. I think the performances are all truly fantastic.
Alex Lothar in Shut Up and Dance is so chilling and effective. Oh my God. He's phenomenal. Also, Kelly MacDonald, she has the most amazing eyes. And in Most Hated in the Nation, those big Kelly MacDonald eyes when she's being interrogated and she feels like she has failed everyone, including her partner, are just absolutely killed me. And I have a lot of time. I've always appreciated his work. He's been I think he's one of the greatest character actors, Jimmy Simpson.
Oh yeah, Jimmy Simpson, like such a consistent, great presence.
Just wonderful.
He knows I love a character actor who understands the power of their own physicality or their appearance and knows how to like manipulate their face to really get what the character's supposed to do. Because sometimes you watch Jimmy Simpson and it's like, oh, he's just a goofy guy. And then sometimes you watch him and you're like, you are the scariest man alive.
I also think he does sleaze in such a particularly skillful way. There was just a slight touch of a McPoyle in USS Callister, which just made me shiver. It was phenomenal.
Have you ever seen Amy Heckerling's Loser?
I don't think so, actually.
That was like Jimmy Simpson's like breakthrough role, and he plays such a sleaze bag with like also incredible like early 2000s fashion, because Mona Marshall is a costuming goddess. But you watch him in that movie and it's like, oh, there are little sprinkles of that in so many roles moving forward. Like, you figured out very early on what you could do better than anyone else in this industry.
Oh, and then he just upends it completely in something like Westworld, where he is genuinely chilling in a completely different way. Not a single ounce of sleaze in that performance.
Yeah, he's really, I'm glad you brought him up so we could have just like a moment to give him his flowers, because he really deserves it.
Just like a moment of appreciation for Jimmy Simpson. Good for him. He's always reliably good. And in the sequel, in the USS Callister sequel, he is just pure comedy gold. He's just, he understood the assignment. He's like, I'm here as comic relief. I'm not here to be serious. I'm not here to be dramatic or scary. I just need to be goofy and wild and make everyone laugh. Good for him.
I mean, and on the USS Callister, like, Kristen Milioti is really exploding in a big way right now because of the Penguin. But I think like Black Mirror, and then also she has a special episode on Mythic Quest. Like, she's also proven to be one of these just phenomenal actors who can like show up for like a very contained story and just knock it out of the park. And I think Black Mirror was the first time a lot of people really saw her do that.
You mentioned earlier that Black Mirror owes a lot to Twilight Zone, which I completely agree with, and Brooker has spoken about that. And there's such a tradition of anthology shows and movies, both in horror and sci-fi. I wonder, where do you see Black Mirror's influence in other TV or even film?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I feel like the way that Twilight Zone sort of inspired every sci-fi and horror movie that followed, Black Mirror is definitely doing that with a lot of the indie space. I think it's also inspired a lot of people to question the way that they explore themes of technology, because it has become such just a part of our lives. Like, to pretend that it's just to pretend that you can kind of get through the day without having to use it in some way, shape, or form is just foolish as far as I'm concerned. Like, you're lying to people when you say that. But I think about there's a movie I loved from I think 2 years ago now, but Franklin Rich's The Artifice Girl, which is one of the most haunting things I've ever watched. But the entire movie is about how this technology is going to be a reflection of the people who use it, but from the perspective of like the AI that is absorbing all of the just horror that we are feeding it, and how it affects, you know, the quote unquote personality of the AI, of this artifice girl, of, you know, if she spends her entire day absorbing just the worst of humanity, like, is that going to wear her down eventually? And, you know, that I think is so fascinating. And that is a story that I don't know if it gets to exist in a world without Black Mirror.
Before we wrap up, AJ, you've sort of alluded to what you would like to see, but outside of the themes that that you were talking about earlier, is there anything else that you would like to see the show tackle in future seasons?
Yeah, definitely things with influencer culture I would love for sure. Something else that I think would be very interesting is the people who have now kind of become dependent on certain technologies. And this is very much like a post, I mean, we're still in the pandemic, but like post-quarantine era of pandemic, is that because we restructured the way that a lot of society works in terms of like your Instacart delivery for things, or your Amazon delivery for items. There are people who are, you know, disabled, or for, you know, any number of reasons are kind of really can't leave their home with ease to do things, that have these great tools at their disposal to help them. Well, what happens when those tools goes away and we no longer have the community built in of like, oh, I get my groceries for my elderly neighbor, or I get, you know, I mow the grass for my neighbor who, you know, is unable to do so. We've sort of eradicated those community building, you know, relationships in favor of gig work. And so what happens to us if the gig work goes away? What happens to the people who have now become kind of dependent on that gig work, not of any fault of their own, but just because that's how society has shifted? That is something I would very much love to see how it is explored, because I feel that way about myself quite a bit. I think about it a lot in my own relationship with my, you know, dependence on gig work services, because as much as I would love to hire a friend to do something, ask a friend for help, that's not always feasible. And I do depend on a lot of these services, and imagining a world without them is a nightmare, is a nightmare.
I kind of want to see something about, we mentioned before the gamification of everything, but I'd be really interested in the obsession that we have with logging everything. And it sort of relates to influencer culture. I'm really fascinated by the amount of work that goes into just logging your day, logging your food, logging the movies you watch, the exercise you do, the places you go to. And I think there's something, I don't think we really talk about how that affects our relationship with the world and with those experiences, and what happens if all of those logging technologies perhaps disappear. And
oh yeah,
there's something about how it's genuinely shifted our relationship with our activities that I would like to see explored. And this is not so much more of a theme, but rather I would really love to see Black Mirror experiment a little bit more aesthetically. There's a couple of episodes that stand out, like the one with Maxine Peake, Metalhead, which is all black and white. And I think Loch Henry plays a lot with kind of the language of Netflix true crime docs, but it is genuinely quite straight and narrow, kind of the way, with flourishes, and, you know, it uses different directors that come in for particular episodes. But I'd really like it to go a bit wild and a bit bold, and kind of really shift with what it does visually to perhaps represent or even connect with the emotional experience of using a particular technology.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that they have the space and they definitely have the budget now to get a little bit more adventurous cinematically with how they tell these stories. And I would be all about that. But now I'm like hyper fixating on what you said about logging, because like I fought joining Letterboxd for the longest time because I was like, I know myself. I know that I become like a completionist. And if I can't log every single movie I've already seen, I'm going to feel like it's incomplete, not because I feel that it's incomplete, but because I know that other people looking at this, it's that perception thing, are going to look at this and be like, I can't believe she hasn't seen this. And it's like, I have 100 times. I just didn't log it. But I think about it at the end of the year when I will see friends who are like, I watched 600 movies this year. And I'm like, but can you retain any of them? That is so many. Are you watching them because you're just trying to like, I have to see this many movies, or are you allowing yourself to like really sit with them and be consumed by them? Like, what is your relationship with this movie if that was like the 8th thing that you watched that day, you know? Like, I think about that a lot.
And also, what are you not logging? You know?
Right.
Because logging something is an active choice, or at least, you know, in theory it is. So like with Letterboxd, for example, like I love using it, and it substituted my physical. I had a whole notebook. I have a series of notebooks that I still have where I documented every film that I was watching just for me, just for myself, because I wanted to keep a log. But at the same time, that's changed. What if I watch something truly dreadful, like embarrassingly cringy, and I don't want other people to see that I've watched it? Or what if you watch things that you're NDA'd and you're not supposed to put it on social media anywhere? What if you watch films? I'm a programmer, so I don't want other people to know what I'm watching for consideration, because that might reveal what films I'm going after. I don't want any of that. So my letterbox is inherently incomplete because I cannot log every film that I watch for work on my personal letterboxd.
Yep, I do the same thing. And I also am not great about logging when I've watched something multiple times. Like there are some movies that I will watch like once, you know, a month, every month for 10 years. Like I have a couple of those. It's like, I'm not going to log that every single time because like my relationship with why I watch that is like personal. I don't need people speculating why I watched a certain movie, you know, like 20 times in 1 year. Like no one needs to deal with that. And I also gave myself the freedom of, I don't have any star rankings on my Letterboxd because I also think that a ranking system is also very personal for every person. And I think this could be something explored in Black Mirror as I'm thinking about it, is that we use all of like these same apps. We all use, you know, social media, Letterboxd, what have you, but we don't use them all the same way. Like my Letterboxd is more just like a log and a place for me to share, you know, oh, if you want my full thoughts on this movie, go click this review. But I'm not going to give a star rating on it because my category of like what determines, you know, a 5-star movie is not going to be the same as what somebody else considers a 5-star movie. We're not using the same metrics. And similarly with social media, like there are some people who their social media is an extension of themselves and they talk online the way that they do in real life. And for some people, it's a place where they go to shitpost and like say the nonsense that they would never say out loud. And that I think is a very interesting relationship to explore as well. Is it's not what we're using, but how we're using, which I think, again, that's the heart of Black Mirror. And before we wrap up, AJ, do you think that the show is still relevant, or do you think that it's sort of exhausted itself? I think that Black Mirror will always be relevant, but I think the general public might not always view it as such because they are going to just focus on whatever the weird tech is. And in that sense, I think, yeah, maybe Black Mirror has extended itself a little bit because technology is moving so quickly that we're often catching up to the technology that is supposed to be futuristic. But the heart of the show will never go out of style because ultimately it is about humans and it's about human nature and our relationships with one another and our emotional competency or lack thereof. And we'll never stop telling stories about that because that is, I think, the core of every story that's ever been told.
I'd also add that I quite like the inconsistency of the Black Mirror drops. I think it always comes around as a surprise and a really welcome one. Mm-hmm. And partly I like that because, as you say, our relationship with technology has so changed and shifted and compressed itself to the point where the average Joe will know the names of tech CEOs and will understand technology that was unfathomable to us even 5-7 years ago. So I think it is now that our reality has caught up with the stories that Black Mirror imagines. So it needs a bit of room to see what human possibilities might be good to explore that it hasn't already touched on. And it's not about being prescient or about predicting the present or anything like that. It's about finding or observing, I should say, new human experiences and new human reactions that were not yet visible because the technology that we have available now or that we're using in a different way than we used to before because either we've twisted its original intention or we're misusing it, that reveals itself with time. And I think that's what happened with social media. The intention of social media was not what it ended up being. Similarly with dating apps and with dating sites. And I would like for it to take a few years hiatus so we can see what new hells we open up for ourselves and what new tragedies we find in the way that we misuse the technology of now. Because we've invented enough gadgets, but I think we're playing catch up with ourselves.
Yes.
Based on how we're reacting or how we're using these sites and these apps and the tech that we can hold in our hands. Because otherwise it's not that there's not enough imagination in the show to speculate and invent these possibilities, but I think it is at its strongest when it's being really faithful to human interactions, as opposed to when it's trying to invent a new form of tech that might be very highfalutin, convoluted. And I think it's really telling that the last couple of seasons actually, when the distance between the imagination of the show and our technological reality has really been compressed. And now the show is looking into the past and seeing, well, what did we do differently then? And why are we doing it? And why are we having such a bad time right now when we weren't back then? Or were we also having a bad time back then and we just mythologized everything through the goggles of nostalgia?
Oh, yeah. I think you're exactly right. I think we're going to start looking back to figure out how we can make it through forward. And I think we're going to start seeing more stories like that. Give me a Black Mirror episode about party lines.
Vijay, you've been amazing. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the show before I let you go?
I think Black Mirror is a show best experienced through your own personal lens. So many people get fixated on like rankings of Black Mirror and they skip over episodes that, this is like the least good episode. This is the worst episode of this season or whatever. Don't skip those. Because I think that there are a lot of themes that are explored and re-explored in different ways. And, what works for one person might not work for you, but what doesn't work for one person might really resonate with you. And so I hope people start really appreciating Black Mirror as the anthology that it is, which is different pieces, but ones that are all connected.
That's a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation. I can't thank you enough for your time and for your insights, BJ. And where can people find more of your work online?
Thank you again for having me. This was such a delight. I am on all forms of social media at BJ Colangelo. My writing is mostly at these days Flash Film and Fangoria. And then I also co-host a podcast with my wife Harmony called This Ends at Prom, where we examine movies about or marketed towards teen girl audiences. It's a little flexible. I usually tell people it's between Mary-Kate and Ashley movies and somebody having a quarter-life crisis. That's usually the age range. But we do it across all genres of film, your common Clueless, or also, an assassin film like the Japanese Baby Assassins.
Why not throw in some assassins in there?
Listen, some people's coming of age experience is figuring out what dress they're going to wear to prom, and some people's coming of age experience is learning how to kill a man. You never know.